Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Vilma Espin. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy end of March. Yesterday, Louise and I were walking along the Columbia River. There's this kind of walking trail that we go on, and that's just a few blocks from our house. And when we would pass people, we would all move 6 feet apart. And I still had to come up with something better. If you have any suggestions, something better than happy pandemic. But because people are like, they're not talking to each other. I mean, this is what my friends in Scotland and the UK were telling me over the weekend when we did this Zoom conference call. It was like, yeah, we go out for a walk and people stay away from you 6 feet away, but they also are afraid to talk to you. They don't even establish eye contact. And it's like, we don't know the new protocol. And so I'd just been trying to, break the ice and say happy pandemic for lack of something better. If you've got a better phrase, one guy said, yesterday he laughed. He says, I've never heard that one before. And most people laugh when I say it, but, it's kind of, dark humor, I guess you would call it. But it's like, trying to make something out of this incredibly gruesome situation. I mean, that's the sad and simple reality that we're all facing right now, is that because Donald Trump spent 2 months ignoring his own spy agencies, ignoring his own Department of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar, for goodness sakes, the guy who doubled the price of insulin when he ran Eli Lilly, Alex Azar, the head of HHS, asked for $2 billion for personal protective equipment back in February. And the Trump administration cut that request down to cut it by 75%. But anyhow, as we're looking at this, we're all experiencing shock and anger and frankly nightmares. I mean, there was a period, it was like the week before last, where almost every night I was waking up in the middle of the night with bad dreams. That's largely past. I think this is how we process stuff. I haven't had a nightmare or bad dream. None of them were nightmare quality, but they were bad dreams that were bad enough to wake me up. And this is how we process stuff. This is how our mind processes stuff. But about what we're dealing with here is how Donald Trump created this crisis in the United States and is now claiming that, 3,000 people died in China, but if 200,000 die here, I did a really good job. I mean, we now have more than twice as many confirmed cases in the United States, population 300 million, as China does, population 1.2 billion. You say, well, I don't trust the numbers out of China. Well, look at South Korea then. South Korea has had fewer than 300 deaths through this whole entire period, and they're only adding a couple every day. We're adding hundreds every day, and we're on the verge of adding thousands. I'm talking deaths, not new cases, every day here in the United States. So, as we're watching this guy lie and procrastinate and grandstand and BS us, and of course blame everybody in sight, there's a larger emotion, I think, beyond the fear that the nightmares may reflect or all this stuff. There's a larger emotion, I think, that's reaching deep into the lives of probably most all of us, and that's grief. I am grieving the loss of normalcy in my country. I am grieving the failure of our national leadership. You know, I can't, in my lifetime, there has never been an administration this incompetent. And I think, frankly, in the history of the United States, there has never been an administration this incompetent. Herbert Hoover, when the stock market crashed in 1929, dithered and did nothing for 2 years, basically, on the advice of his Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, who said, oh, it'll just flush out the dead wood. The economy will come back much healthier if you just let these failing companies die. In fact, his phrase, Andrew Mellon's famous phrase was, liquidate everything. Well, you know, finally, by 1932, and throughout 1932, in fact, Herbert Hoover started putting into place stimulus measures. He got legislation passed. He got a Reconstruction Act put into place. Now, they weren't big enough. They were just a start, but he at least was trying to do something. Trump, he leaves it up to Nancy Pelosi. But so we're grieving the loss of, or the failure of national leadership. I can tell you, I am grieving the loss of my physical connection to my kids, the ability to go out and have dinner with them or visit them in their homes or sit around and play board games with them. You know, we're trying to figure out ways around this, and not just my kids, my grandkids, my wife's mother, our parents. I think we're all grieving that. I think we're a nation in grieving, and we haven't come to terms with it yet. We're grieving the reality that we will soon be grieving the death of friends and family. We're seeing national figures. Chris Cuomo, CNN's Chris Cuomo, the brother of Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, was just diagnosed with COVID-19. He's got fever and chills. He says he's going to do his show from his basement. He's self-quarantining in his family's home. He's particularly flipped out that his mother came over a couple days ago because she's lonely. And his older brother, Andrew, had just given them hell for that. I mean, this is, we're grieving the loss of work. Work actually is an important thing. Work for many people gives some meaning to their life, in addition to a paycheck and benefits. We're grieving the loss of our paychecks. We're grieving the loss, I'm taking no pay anymore. We're grieving the loss of our, and I've got it, much better than most people. I still have something to do. And I still have a company that at least is supporting a couple of my employees. Knock wood. But I think, I know there are millions of Americans who are grieving the loss of their paychecks. And Donald Trump says, well, we'll send them $1,200. Right. Tomorrow's the first of the month. Today's the last day of March. Rent is due for many people. Mortgage payments are due. Credit card payments are due. Is a one-time $1,200 check going to help the way that help is needed? No chance. And yet the White House yesterday, when they were asked about Nancy Pelosi's suggestion that we should send a couple $1,000s to everybody in the country every month on a regular basis to keep people above float, like Germany is doing, and France is doing, and Denmark is doing, and Finland is doing, and Iceland is doing, and Norway is doing. And I mean, I could just go through the list, right? Like basically all the countries of Europe are doing. They said no. The White House said no. We've done our stimulus. No more spending. And several Republican senators have said the same thing. We'll get to that story as we continue. But, we're grieving the loss of income. And the rest of us are grieving the loss of income for the rest of us. I mean, those of us who have not lost income or who will be able to get through, are on Social Security or something, we're grieving the fact that our friends and neighbors, are losing their income. Yet we're figuring out ways through this crisis. I'm taking daily walks, I'm meditating. I found some exercise videos on YouTube that I'm doing, because being sedentary, just sitting around will kill you. It's not good for you. Louise and I are trying to, we normally walk a couple miles a day. We're trying to up it to 4 or 5 miles a day. I'm taking long hot baths with a good novel. I've done that much of my life, but it's good relaxation. We're binge watching TV, not the news, but right now we're binge watching Outlander. This last season that's now on Prime is much less violent than some of the earlier ones. We're Zoom conferencing with friends. We're FaceTiming with family and friends. I'm venting on Twitter. So those are the things that I'm grieving, and those are some of the ways that Louise and I are coping. How about you? What are you grieving, and how are you coping? 202-808-9925 is our number. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're all mourning for our way of life. How are you working around it? We'll be right back. And welcome back. Scott in Oakland, California. Hey, Scott, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to get the word out. It seems to be going under the radar, this story about states having guidelines for critical care, who gets it, who doesn't. Obviously, the underlying health conditions, high blood pressure, cancer, et cetera, diabetes. One thing that I read is that people with cognitive disabilities, in other words, mental retardation, Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Is that a underlying medical condition? I'm outraged.
I don't know, but what we're seeing, Scott, this is all just a euphemism for rationing medical care. That's what we're at.
Right.
That's where we're at now, or where we're
I was standing in the exact same spot I was standing when I heard about Sandy Hook. I'm self-employed. I was self-employed then. I was not self-employed up until about 2 weeks ago. Now I'm self-employed again. But in 2012, I was self-employed, and I was standing in the exact same spot when I heard about Sandy Hook. And I literally had the exact same, just this incredible. I just exploded with tears, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The other thing I wanted to get out there, What are they doing with these tests? Are they extracting DNA from these tests? Why would Jared Kushner be interested?
No, the DNA it's not your that they're taking out, Scott. It's the DNA of the virus that they're looking at, and it's actually not even DNA; it's RNA. So, Scott, thanks a lot for the call. Linda in Coconut Creek, Florida. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm in Broward County, where it's next to Miami-Dade and Monroe, and then I'm further south.
Oh my!
And we're in the hotbed of it. There's a beach probably 10 minutes away from me that they have shut it all down, but he refuses to shut the state down. And my issue with
he being Ron DeSantis, the governor.
Yes, is why the heck is he not just locking down this state, say, go home if you have to go home, but nobody enters? We have a cruise ship out there with 133 sick and 4 dead that they're going to let into Port Everglades, which, I'm not unsympathetic at all. I'm hoping that they screen them, they put them somewhere and help them with their medical needs. But he's kind of doing nothing. I mean, he's just, fly in if you feel like flying in. I mean, and I'll end with this. The Marvelous Miss Maisel. You have to watch it on Prime. If you and Louise want something great to watch that because you'll love it. You'll love everything about that particular show. It's on Prime. She's a comedian who's trying to come up in. Was a back. This is dated back in the 50s, 60s, and women weren't really big on the comedian stage. And she's trying to break through, and she loses her husband, she loses her family, everything. But it's dated in the 50s, and some of the things that are going on in here are hysterical. Are just if you want something really fun to watch The Marvelous Miss Maisel. Or Killing Eve, which is coming back.
M-A-Z-E-L?
So one or the other. Pardon?
Okay.
I didn't hear you. Okay,
it's
The Marvelous.
M-A-Z-E-L?
Yeah, Marvelous. It's on Prime. It's a Prime, what do you call that, series. Watch that, Tom. You're going to love me. You're going to thank me for that.
Yeah, an Amazon original. Okay, well, check it out, Linda. I suspect Louise is making notes right now. Thank you. Thanks for the call, Linda. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. We'll be right back here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's your media support group for We the People. We'll be right back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. There's a lot in the news today, and I'll just give you a quick recap of some of these things, and then pick up your phone calls and let's get into this. What are we grieving and how are we coping? Because I think these are really important questions to be asking. One Trump campaign official interviewed by the Los Angeles Times, Brad Reed published this over on Raw Story, claims that Trump's campaign is, quote, terrified that the COVID virus, this virus, is going to hammer the rural counties where Trump's support is so strong. They put together basically a white paper that says you must pay attention or you're going to lose the election, bottom line. And, is Trump paying attention? Is he going to lose the election? I don't know. I think that I think the Republicans have a plan in place to prevent vote by mail in the 17 states where it's difficult or very difficult to do, and then claim when the Electoral College vote is counted that they couldn't certify the vote in their state, and therefore there won't be the number of electoral votes needed to win an election, and therefore the election will be thrown to the Senate, or to the House, excuse me. And with each state having one vote. There are 50 states, there would be 50 votes. And the vote is determined by the state's legislature, and there's 34 or 35 states whose legislatures are controlled or are majority Republican, which means that Donald Trump gets reelected if the election gets thrown to the House. This is under the 12th Amendment. And, I think this is what he's planning for. So, number two, this is a new analysis by U.S. health insurance companies this is by Covered America. It's the state insurance marketplace that was created by the Affordable Care Act in California. And they did this analysis and they said, okay, people are losing their jobs, and so they're losing their employer paid for health insurance. And without employer paid for health insurance, there's less employer dollars going to the insurance companies. So they're losing customers. Their pool of people who are covered is shrinking. And those would be the healthiest the ones who are employed, right? That pool is shrinking. At the same time that the costs associated with this coronavirus, from testing to treatment and everything else, are exploding. And they're going to get a hell of a lot worse as time goes forward. So how do these private for-profit insurance companies deal with this? According to this study done by Covered California, next year, we're going to see 40% increases in insurance costs, which frankly I think could lead to a death spiral for the insurance industry. And this is very scary news. Meanwhile, we have these kind of stories. Last week, a 17-year-old boy in Los Angeles County died from COVID-19 after he was denied treatment at an urgent care center. This is a 17-year-old. Why was he denied treatment? He was uninsured. Rex Paris, the mayor of Lancaster, California, who did not agree with that decision, said he didn't have insurance, so they did not treat him. It's amazing. And meanwhile, Trump's followers, I mean, this is getting truly bizarre. You know, Trump is saying, well, you know, it could be 2.2 million people dying. He's quoting that study out of the UK of America. And he's saying, well, if only 100,000 died, then I did a great job. That's, you know, that's a third as many people died in the Civil War. We lost a little over 600,000 people in the Civil War. We only lost, 3,000 people on 9/11. It was 2996. Both Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, the death toll in those two cities combined was 146,000 people. Trump is saying that he's going to kill more Americans than Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed Japanese. And he should be congratulated for that as having done a very good job. And meanwhile, Trump has new allies. There's a new movement that had, seriously, this is a thing. And it's huge. Coronavirus truthers. They are camping out, not camping out. They are taking their cameras to hospital parking lots, the visitor parking lots, and discovering that hospital visitor parking lots all across the country are largely empty. And they're saying, see, this is proof there's no coronavirus. It's all a hoax. It's being made up by the media. Well, the reason that the visitor parking lots are empty is because you can't visit a hospital anymore. They won't let you in. No matter who is in there, whether it's your brother, your sister, your dad, your mom, your wife, your husband, your kid, you can't go in. And so, nobody's in the parking lot except these idiots with their cameras. But it's become a cottage industry. They've got their own hashtag. It's hashtag #FilmYourHospital. Check it out on Twitter. Just, search for that hashtag, #FilmYourHospital. This was started by a QAnon conspiracy theorist. And these guys actually believe this, that this whole thing is just a hoax. People are not parking at the hospital because they're not going in for elective surgery. And like I said, they can't visit anybody. But this, to the QAnon people, to the well, they're called coronavirus truthers, this is proof. It's all a hoax. Okay, after the break, I'm going to pick up your calls. What are you mourning and how are you coping? And, what advice do you have for the rest of us? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society,
the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Antonin Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the High Court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the High Court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge-picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, why did Trump delay? America deserves an answer. Professor Richard Wolff is here on his thoughts on the new coronavirus economy, the stimulus, and the 3.3 million people being laid off. Public Citizen's Peter May-Barduk has a warning to pandemic profiteers, and Chief Washington analyst with the DC radio company, Victoria Jones, drops by to talk about COVID-19, UK, Boris v. Trump, and others. Stay tuned. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So the questions I've been asking and that I'd like to be taking calls on are, number one, what are you grieving? If you have somebody to add to my list, or just to express your own, experience. Number two, how are you coping? What are you doing? And number three, do you have a good greeting that's better than happy pandemic? And Twitter, actually, there's a bunch of people on Twitter offering suggestions. Tom Adler says, I say happy Trump virus. That's a good one, although happy Trump anything just kind of grates me. Curtis Lester says, when I have to shop, I thank the clerk and say, stay well. Don't know if it would work as a greeting. Anna B says, you and Louise should wear funny outfits when you go for walks. People will notice and talk to you. Maybe they'll just think, oh no. BJ Doucette says, I smile, nod, and say, be well. Some respond, some don't. The Kitchen Witch says, these are all on Twitter, says, I have the perfect greeting for social isolation walks. When I pass by from 6 feet, especially people I know still support the commander-in-chief, I call out to them, so how's all this American exceptionalism working out for you? Expectedly, I get mixed responses. Yeah. See, I'm a little wary about getting political on this. Jay, talking about what Jay is, I'm assuming it's a him since it's at sensible_man, says, I can't hug my partner who's in medical and my sister. That's real unfortunate. One of my kids is rotating into the emergency room in a week or two, and the other one might. And my third kid is a public health official, is the chief public health official for one of the counties north of us, and has been, right in the middle of the scrum. And Louise and I are really concerned about that and mourning that. Grace asked, if Republicans try not to certify the election in their states, don't they lose congressional and Senate seats too? No, the 12th Amendment scam that I think the Republican Party is getting for, that I just described a few minutes ago, is limited to the Electoral College. So they can refuse to certify their Electoral College votes without sacrificing the votes for members of the House and Senate and local offices and things like that. Rita Boone says, Tom, I'm mourning the loss of common sense in the U.S., which has been lost long before COVID-19. And Aaron Anachario says, you're exactly correct, Tom. The parking lot at the hospital I work at is relatively empty now, but the reason is because there is very limited visitation, and elective procedures and non-essential clinics are all suspended. But, we've got this whole coronavirus truther movement going on. It's bizarre. So let's pick up your calls. Candida in Seattle. Hey, Candida, what's up?
Hi, good morning. I appreciate you asking what we're grieving, and I hadn't thought of it that way yet, but certainly you're right on. And there's a bunch of things I know that when I spent time last night, my husband and I, one of the things we're doing is meditating more and doing it together, which is pretty powerful. And when we were doing a meditation last night with community online streaming, and it was a teaching us in giving, or taking and giving, taking other people's suffering, letting it ripen upon you, and then giving back that they would be free of their suffering. And it's a pretty powerful thing to do. And when we were done, I realized I felt this really deep sense of grief, and I realized I had been disconnecting from what feels overwhelming, which is the suffering of others. And so, during that, I had this profound experience of just needing to break down and cry. And it for the healthcare workers, they're on the front lines, and their families, and the seniors that are home alone, and the women that are experiencing domestic violence that have to be home, and the acutely ill, and the kids that are going hungry. I mean, just this letting it in finally. While I think I thought I was protecting myself by not thinking about it too much, it's different than reading the news, which I definitely have to shelter myself from, but certainly letting myself touch into that tender pain that other people are experiencing. It's a huge grief, and I'm doing a ton of things to take care of myself. Walking, you had mentioned that, doing lots of walks, running, just to get my body moving, doing a lot of yoga, meditating more and more, drinking less alcohol. At first it was like, this is a way to kind of cope with it, not like over drinking, but just like having a drink each night. And now I feel like, you know what, like just acknowledging that that's probably not the best way to do it either. Gardening, definitely, like you and Louise, like my husband and I, we watch a lot of funny shows. We're very mindful about like watching things that make us laugh. And also like with my sons, which I'm very, very fortunate to be able to have both of my kids at home. And so, just really recognizing that as much as we can here, because we have a lot because we are still all healthy, to be grateful for, being grateful for Inslee for what he's done in this state to really shut things down. So focusing on that, but then also letting the suffering and the grief of what this is is actually, I think, really important and healing.
That's extraordinary, Candida. What a great list. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the call. And I just add, I spent a week with the Dalai Lama back in 1999 or 2000, and every afternoon we had about a 4-hour audience with him. There was a group of us. There's a movie about it. It's called Dalai Lama Renaissance, narrated by Harrison Ford. But I tell you that to establish some authority for explaining what I'm about to say, which is that the Dalai Lama walked us through this meditation of compassion. I mean, he's the Buddha, he's the reincarnation of the Buddha of compassion. And it was very similar to what Candida just described, just opening your heart to the suffering of others and taking it in and then releasing it on their behalf, essentially. And it was really powerful. And Candida, you just reminded me of that. I haven't done that in years, so I'm going to put that in my meditation this afternoon. And, we'll see. Thank you very much for that. So I'm trying to find my grieving callers here and my suggestion callers, and hoping that 2 or 3 stars might let me. Here we go. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I think one of the things we're missing the most is being able to go to church. This is like the most important time for Lenten season and the Passion of Christ, and I just think that this is a time when we should be remembering the suffering and being able to give more. So that's what I'm missing.
I would think, Denise, that this might be a great time for us all to start new rituals in our families. My mentor, Gottfried Mueller, every Friday night in his home, they would light 7 candles and say a prayer and have a glass of wine and then not do anything until the end of the day, Saturday night. And he's Christian, but it was a ritual that Louise and I adopted, and many people we know have adopted. In fact, we did with our little group, based on his work, that we had this Zoom meeting with people in Scotland and Ohio and Colorado on Sunday or Saturday, and or maybe no, it was Friday afternoon. In fact, because it was Shabbat. And we did that together. One of our friends in the UK had her son light the candles on the Zoom feed. So thoughts on that, Denise? New rituals that might work for your family? Maybe this is a new Easter ritual that you can create?
Well, we are doing our masses online, and we're sharing the sacrament of the Eucharist spiritually. There's prayers you can do for that. And, we're doing a lot of, spring cleaning, but right now you can't even bring anything away to the charitable. I mean, everything's closed, but we're getting things ready to, when this is over, bring everything away. We're doing okay. We know we're doing it better than others. I mean, we live on the lake. We get to look out at the lake every day. We can go sit on our deck, even though it's still winter here, on a warm day. I mean, we're doing okay, but we're just feeling bad about everybody in this world. And I've been, Tom, I've talked to you a lot in the last few years, and I've been politically depressed. So we watch the news, but when Trump is on, we have to switch it. We can't look.
Yeah, I had to turn him off yesterday when he started his campaign rally conference. Louise and I put on a 15-minute YouTube exercise video.
Yeah.
I was exercising with the little dumbbells, and then when we finished with that, he was still on, and so we went to another network. We went to the BBC because
the Animal Planet's saving my life.
Yeah, there you go.
When you gotta
well, and our cat.
Yeah, and our dogs. Yeah, our dogs.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, half the members of our family now have found those videos for cats over on YouTube where it's birds and squirrels and mice, and all their cats are watching TV now. And then we're watching our cats watching TV. So, Denise, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And thanks for a great conversation, as always. I really think we're all in mourning more than anything else. I think that's the dominant emotion that is sweeping this country right now. How are you dealing with it?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, your support group for We the People. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Oh, hi. How's it going?
Good.
You had a caller before named Scott, and he was talking about disabled individuals. I have the visually impaired. I also have CT, and I have friends who are also impaired, and I'm concerned about their health because, luckily they're home right now. But if they get this, they can be seriously impacted by this. And as you're talking about rationing of health care, that really concerns me. You talk about mourning, that because one of my friends is someone I've known since childhood, and she's been a wonderful part of my life, and I want to help her as much as I possibly can. So this really does concern me. And as far as mourning is concerned, I think we're also mourning about the everyday norms we used to go through. Go to the store, go to the park. Now I got to be 6 feet away from someone, and that's hard.
Yeah, it's like normal life has been severely disrupted. And
also I have a psych background, so I understand from that level as well. And I think you would understand that as on that level too, I think. And it just really is amazing. I think also it happened so quickly. What is it like, if we prepared a month ago and we went in as easy and slowly, then we could say, okay, do this, don't do that. It happened all at once.
Right. No, it didn't happen all at once. It appeared all at once, but it started happening in January. January 20th. No, I get what you're saying, Sean. No, you don't have to apologize. I absolutely get what you're saying. I got to move along to another caller here, Sean, but thank you for the call. That was very insightful. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff.
Good morning, Tom. I usually call you Fred to joke around, but it's kind of serious. And I mean no disrespect when I call you that, or Professor Flintstone.
Oh, I get it. I get it. Yeah, that's what the president calls me, so it's all good.
My admiration runs very deep for you.
Thank you, Cliff.
Instead of saying happy pandemic when you're taking your walk with Louise, get a funny hat and a little $3 red clown nose. You don't have to say a word. Just try to make eye contact with people as you pass them along
the way. That's all. Honk the nose?
No, well, whatever.
Did you ever listen to that Firesign Theater album, We're All Bozos on This Bus?
Oh man, I got some fire sign back then, but I don't remember that one.
It's good chunks of it are online. It is so hysterical.
Those guys were great.
Oh, they were brilliant. Go ahead.
I don't know if you remember, one of your callers last week mentioned the Antichrist, talking about Trump, and I don't give it much credence, Tom, because we remember, Tom, Ronald Wilson Reagan, 666. Remember how much we heard that back then?
Well, if Reagan hadn't cut the deal with the Iranians and committed treason to make himself president, you would not have Trump president right now. You never would have had neoliberalism if Jimmy Carter had gotten another term.
Well, I agree with you there. But that wasn't the reason. That wasn't the explanation for Reagan's presidency or his dirty deeds. It wasn't the Antichrist thing. Anyways, Tom, we have this horrific, amazing pandemic ravaging the globe. We're in a mass extinction, which for some reason never gets covered.
climate change.
Yeah, I don't think this is an extinction event. Oh, you mean the larger environmental one. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Totally. Yeah, I get it. Cliff, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I used a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. For the insight, that's remarkable. Jackie in Grass Valley, California. Hey, Jackie, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Glad to talk to you again. I'm just mentioning that I am grieving for everyone that is suffering and losing people to the COVID-19.
Yeah, almost 3,000 families now, or over 3,000 families have been wiped out by having a family member die
California,
at Donald Trump's hands. Yeah, I mean, this is what's amazing, Jackie, is that the Boston Globe this morning said in their editorial that Trump has blood on his hands. I mean, this is a relatively conservative newspaper. I get it. It's a Democratic newspaper, but yes, he does. He does have the blood of these 3,000 people on his hands. If he had acted in January when he was told to act, or for that matter, back in December, if he had started planning when he was told to start planning, we would not have 3,000 dead people, and we wouldn't be heading toward a couple 100,000.
Absolutely,
back to you, Jackie.
Absolutely. I am so with you on that, and it grieves me desperately that we are suffering so badly.
Yes, I'm with you. Jackie, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that, Jackie. And I'm with you. And I'm grieving for those people as well, and for our healthcare workers and their families. In many cases, they can't go home to their families. In fact, in all cases, they probably shouldn't go home to their families. And we should be taking over hotels all around the major hospitals and providing, food and housing to the healthcare workers. Brian in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Brian, your thoughts?
Oh, hi. I got on quicker than normal. I was writing down my thoughts. But anyways, thank you. My sense of grieving is mainly the most underlying one is mainly that through all this suffering and all this pain that we're dealing with, that some of it could have been avoidable if Donald Trump was a better human being and president. We're not learning our lesson. We won't have learned our lesson. Like, it'll all be for naught. Like, we're just as divided and partisan as ever. And his popularity's ticked up. So I want out of this suffering, at least there's a silver lining, and I don't see it.
Actually, his popularity is starting to go down, and his marks on how he's handling the coronavirus is going down. And his campaign is freaking out that when this starts hitting red states, and it's going to hit Florida next week in a big way, and the week after that, it's going to start hitting other red states. When this starts hitting red states, you are going to see Donald Trump just fall off the edge of the earth poll-wise. Brian, thanks for the call. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike.
Hi, Tom. By the way, caveat, wine and open flames, be careful. Maybe not.
The wine won't catch on fire. The whole thing of 100 proof is that 100 proof is the level of alcohol, which is 50% alcohol, at which a beverage will catch on fire if you ignite it. And that's why it was called 100 proof alcohol, because, and wine's only like, 8, 10, 12%. Forgive my interruption.
Yeah, that's okay. Just, be avoiding excessive consumption of the alcohol and handling open flames.
Oh, I get it.
But,
yeah.
I was just hoping to elicit some prayers or thoughts for comfort for a lady named Marie, who just lost her 24-year-old son to pulmonary embolism secondary to a viral pneumonia. Beautiful lad and young man from our church who died without his mother being able to hold his hand or explain anything to him on the demise. So one of the things I've done to fight the isolation and torpor is to go to Patreon and kick in a little for your show and Stephanie Miller, because I can't imagine being in this isolation without your shows. And another is that our governor has called for retired health care people to sign up for a volunteer course. So I just went online and did that against all my better judgment, given my age.
Wow.
So
you're a former healthcare worker?
Yeah, I retired 4 years ago at the age of 70 because I thought that was old enough. But
be very careful, Mike.
I won't have that much choice if what we're hearing about is not addressed in terms of protective care. But anyway, what I'm mourning for a much longer period than young Quentin is the loss of our civic norms and the bending over backwards of members of our press to not notice that we're in the hands of a psychopath. We're all in the 7th Cavalry, and Custer is in the White House.
That's a great metaphor. It just occurred to me, too, as you said, that loss of civic norms. Suddenly it hit me. I'm mourning the loss of the ability to go to a theater or a restaurant. I'd never realized how important those things were to me, or how meaningful they were, I guess is the better word.
Or even to aggregate with a simple, modest number of like-minded souls.
Yeah.
It's considerable deprivation.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time before we can get back together again in any way other than virtual like we have right here. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. It was very thoughtful. Sure. I appreciate the feedback. And we'll continue this conversation through the 3 hours of the program, although we've got a bunch of other stuff coming up in the show. In the second hour, I want to get into the story of the GOP over the last 40 years writ large. And in our third hour, we have a great science revolution guest.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct, on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book, Why We're Polarized, by Ezra Klein. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. By Corinne Jean-Pierre.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we've been talking about I was going to say the fact that in my opinion, it's a fact. I may be wrong, but my sense of this is that most of us, depending on our individual circumstances, there's all kinds of emotions that we're experiencing. People who are, who have lost all their income and yet still have bills, they're experiencing shock and loss. People who have lost a family member or friend or acquaintance to the coronavirus, or to, somebody had a heart attack and couldn't get into the hospital because it was overflowing with coronavirus, or didn't go to the hospital because they were afraid of adding coronavirus to the heart attack and then they died. I mean, these kinds of stories are becoming more and more common. And soon they're going to be stories that all of us either tell or know someone close to us who is telling. About death and loss and things like that. This is real stuff. But I think that probably the overwhelming emotion that most of us are feeling, or many of us are feeling right now, is grief. Grief at the loss of competent leadership in our country. If we're in red states, it's even worse. I'm fortunate to live in a blue state where, Kate Brown is our governor here in Oregon. She's doing a very good job of managing this thing. She's locked down the state. It's been that way for, I think, going on 2 weeks. I could be wrong, but for a while now. And, we're hearing good stuff in some of the blue states, but in the red states, it's like, Ron DeSantis still hasn't locked down northern Florida. And there are red states where the governors are just thumbing their noses at people. It's really pretty remarkable. So anyhow, in the midst of this, Donald Trump is out saying that if only 200,000 Americans die, he's done a pretty good job. Which causes me to want to add a third question to my list, or a fourth question. So far, my questions are, are you grieving, and if so, what? What are you doing to cope with that? And we're kind of crowdsourcing solutions. I've shared some of mine with you, from YouTube exercise videos to long baths to meditating. I would add to that trying to reach out more often to my wife and be closer to the people around me. There's a bunch of these things that are possibilities for us, things that we can be doing, and ways that we can be here for each other. And so we're all working on those things. So number two. Number three was how do you greet people when you're out walking? You have to stay 6 feet away from people. You want to say hi to them. I suppose hi is just fine, or good afternoon. I've been saying happy pandemic, but and generally getting positive responses to it. But it's kind of gallows humor, But But let me add a fourth question to my list of questions for you. If Trump says if only 200,000 Americans die, keep in mind we've had 3,000 Chinese die. We've had 3,000 Chinese die. We've had, in South Korea, they haven't even had 300 people die. And they got their first case the same day we got our first case. But they started massive testing while Donald Trump started massive denying. He started lying to us. He didn't tell us about the briefings he was getting back in December and January from the spy agencies. He didn't tell us about his Health and Human Services Secretary warning him in January and then again in early February that we needed millions of pieces of personal protective equipment, that this was coming. He didn't tell us. I mean, he not only didn't tell us, he lied to us about all those things. And as did virtually all the hosts, or at least all the opinion hosts, on Fox so-called news, as did pretty much the entire right-wing hate media panoply or whatever you call it, pantheon. They all lied to us. And many of them knew that they were lying. And now, we have this consequence. Now, in the blue states, where the governors were actually listening to the scientists instead of listening to that fool in the White House, they actually started doing something, and they started doing something fairly quickly. But in the red states, they've been doing nothing, and it's going to get really, really bad in the red states. Mark my words, as a consequence of this. And that's going to take Trump down, and I think it's going to take a lot of Republicans down. There's going to be a reckoning in the fall. But to my fourth question, if Trump says that he's done a great job if only 200,000 Americans die, I need to take the word only out of there. If Trump says he's done a great job if 200,000 Americans die, it raises a question in my mind, what does he think his job is? Seriously, what does this guy think his job is? If he's done a great job and 200,000 Americans are dead, more than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, a third of what we lost in the Civil War, 4 times what we lost in the Vietnam War. I can't do the math on 3,000 to 200,000, but it's like, what is that, almost 100 times, maybe 70 times more than died on 9/11. If he thinks that's a good job, what does he think his job is? Does he think his job is to kill Americans? Does he think his job is to clean out the blue states? Because so far it's been hitting blue states, right? It's been hitting big cities. It hit Seattle, blue state, Washington. Jay Inslee, he's a snake. It's now hitting Louisiana. Oh, John Bell Edwards, he's a Democrat. We're not going to send him what he wants. It hit New York. Andrew Cuomo, a blue state, Democratic governor. You know what they're doing? They're taking the masks and respirators that we send them and they're selling them out the back door of the hospitals. Honest to God, Donald Trump has said that 2 days in a row on television. This mealy-mouthed con man in the White House is blaming healthcare workers and hospitals for his own incompetence that is causing them to be on the front lines of a massive pandemic and perhaps even facing their own deaths as a result of his incompetence. I mean, consider that for a moment. So what does he think his job is? Does he think, see, I have an opinion about that. I have a theory. I think Donald Trump, and I've said this before, I've been saying this for months now, maybe even years. It's hard to remember that we're 3 friggin' years into this presidency. I think Donald Trump thinks that his job is to be game show host in chief, reality show host in chief. I think he thinks that Celebrity Apprentice moved from NBC to the White House, and that every day he has to stage a production. He used to stage his production in front of audiences of thousands of adoring fans. Now he's staging his production in front of tens of millions of Americans who are watching with slack-jawed amazement and horror. We're watching this reality show, the Trump reality show, every day on TV. Actually, I've stopped watching it. I just can't. I'm sickened by it. But people are watching this going, really? He said that? I mean, again, yesterday he was blaming nurses and doctors and paramedics and EMTs and janitors and orderlies, saying that they're stealing these products and selling them out the back doors of hospitals. There's no evidence that that is going on. So that's what I think he thinks his job is. But let me add that question. And, then I've got, we've got a pile of news here that I want to get to. Especially some internal emails that we just got access to as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request. Red Dawn Breaking Bad was the subject field of an email chain that went around more than a month ago inside the Trump administration while they were lying to us. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. Stick with it. And welcome back. Rob in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Rob, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
Well, good morning, Tom. Normally, I would be driving around for my job and listening to you on the radio. It's different than I'm sitting at home making tea and cleaning the kitchen and, of course, watching you on TV, so that's a little bit of a change. But real quick, I just want to mention you were talking about things that people are mourning. I have a job where I get to interact with people and their pets, and especially since you were talking about walking around and greeting people. Obviously, we can't give our neighbors' dogs their treats and give them the pat on the head and interact with them that way, and I think my job's going to be the same way pretty soon. We have a protocol with gloves and all kinds of cleaning of samples, et cetera, when we're in people's homes. So I think the interaction level is going to be quite different. That's kind of a quick mourning thing. But considering some of the segue you're going to be doing in the next hour, I wanted to mention something else because you're going to be talking about the GOP. But oddly enough, no one really talks about, well, what would be happening in this pandemic if Hillary was in office? And I think either way, based on the fact that we lost February, at least thanks to the Donald's ignorance and willful ignorance, really. But I think we would have lost February anyway. And the reason I say that is because I think having listened to Rush, anytime I want to yell at my phone saying that's not true, I'll flip it over. But I was listening when he was still calling it the common cold, folks, less than 3 weeks ago, really. Right. But I think because of the way the media on that side pushes things, we still would have this absolute backlash of people saying it's their constitutional right to continue to, continue commerce and activity in America. We'd be battling this on a different level. We'd still be battling the right.
I'm sure all that's true, Rob, but what Hillary Clinton would not have done 2 years ago is she would not have disbanded the pandemic response force in the National Security Council and the pandemic response force inside the Department of Homeland Security. It's inside Homeland Security. And those two agencies, those two departments and those two agencies would have been providing us with guidance, particularly one of the National Security Council. They knew back in December, they would have known in December what was going on, because that's when the spy agencies were reporting it to Trump and to the State Department. And then in January, when we got our first infection here and South Korea got their first infection, I have to believe that a Clinton administration would have been doing the same thing South Korea was. They would have taken the WHO test kit standards. They would have gotten. It took South Korea 1 week to get 10 companies making those things. We could have easily done the same thing here in the United States. But I get your point. There would still be the coronavirus truthers out there, and they'd probably be 5 times as many of them.
Yeah, probably. And I think it would be different perspectives, meaning that the blue states probably would be in much better shape right now because we would have been proactive and listened to the science and actually listened to reason. But I think in the red states, which they're about to learn a painful lesson, I think that's where that would have been a lot stronger. And I think it is in a way now. But I think you're right. I think that's the next level is where Trump's base is going to realize, wow, this is pretty serious. And as their family members get sick and their communities have to deal with this, they'll hopefully figure that out. So
I think they're going to turn on Trump. What I'm curious about is, are they going to turn on Sean Hannity? Are they going to turn on Laura Ingraham? Are they going to turn on Lachlan and Rupert Murdoch? Are they going to realize that while these billionaire oligarchs were preparing their own shelters and canceling Rupert's birthday party so that he wouldn't be exposed to anybody, at that same time they were paying people to lie to them on Fox News? I'm wondering when or if that's going to happen. Rob, I got to run, but thank you. That was a very, very thoughtful response. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program. And the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Just wanted to catch up on some of the news, what's going on in the world and what's going on around us. And then, I'll be picking up your phone calls on these, what does Trump think his job is, and what are you grieving, and how are you dealing with it? And have you come up with a clever way to say hi to strangers when you're out walking around? And if you're not out walking around, you need to get out walking around. Unless you live in one of those rare places where it's not possible to get out and walk around because you have narrow walkways. There's a floating home community, for example, that I can see from my home that, and Louise and I lived in one for years, where the walkways are only 4 feet wide. I mean, what do you do, right? Hold your breath, I guess. But in any case, how do you greet people? Here's some of the news. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But internal emails. This is the headline over at Raw Story. Internal emails revealed Trump administration officials were warned about lack of protective gear early on. This is maybe the 5th or 6th time we have heard the essentially same kind of message. This is from Kaiser Health News. This is not from some left-wing site. This is Kaiser Health News. A high-ranking federal official in late February warned that the United States needed to plan for not having enough personal protective equipment for medical workers as they began to battle the novel coronavirus, according to internal emails obtained by Kaiser Health News. The emails show that medical workers and first responders would not have enough masks, gloves, face shields, and other supplies known as PPE to protect themselves against infection when treating COVID-19 patients. By the way, we refer to the virus as the coronavirus or the novel coronavirus. When you've got the disease, we refer to it as COVID-19. It's sort of like HIV and AIDS. HIV is the virus, human immunodeficiency virus. AIDS is the disease that it causes. Just, for those of you who are confused or wondering about when you use which phrase. Back to these emails. The email is part of a lengthy chain titled Red Dawn Breaking Bad. Includes senior officials across the Department of Veterans Affairs, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as outside academics and some state health officials. Kaiser Health News obtained the correspondence through a public records request. They go on, these are actually from the emails. This is Eva Lee, the director of the Center for Operations Research in Medicine and Healthcare at Georgia Tech, formerly a scientist at the Atlanta VA Medical Center, health scientist, wrote, "The demand is rising and there is no guarantee that we can continue with the supply since the supply chain has been disrupted." This is on February 25th. Dr. Carter Meacher, a physician at the Department of Veterans Affairs, again on February 25th, more than a month ago, wrote, "We should plan assuming we won't have enough PPE, so need to change the battlefield and how we envision or even define the front lines." The same day, Melcher and others, I'm reading from the Kaiser Health News article, the same day Melcher and others raised the concern in the messages, Trump made remarks to a business roundtable group in New Delhi, India. So at the same time that his Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services and the Veterans Department and the Department of State, at the same time that they are talking among themselves, this is well over a month ago, about how we need to get personal protective equipment into our hospitals nationwide right now to get ready for this. At the same time that was happening, Donald Trump was in India with Indira Modi making a speech to a business roundtable group, and he said, and I quote, "We think we're in very good shape in the United States. Let's just say we're fortunate so far, and we think it's going to remain that way." Right. Meanwhile, a new study has come out suggesting, the study is titled Pandemic Politics, Timing State-Level Social Distancing Responses to COVID-19. It was done by the University of Washington. And it finds that states with Republican governors or majority Republican electorate have lagged far behind their Democratic counterparts in instituting social distancing policies. Those delays are, quote, likely to produce significant ongoing harm to public health. And again, I blame this on Trump, on the Murdochs, and on right-wing hate radio. They say our findings are unambiguous. Political variables are the strongest predictor of the early adoption of social distancing policies. The difference between the red states and the blue states, or between conservatives, the difference could translate into a significant number of human lives lost. Ron DeSantis, meanwhile, still hasn't enacted a stay-at-home order for the entire state of Florida. DeSantis took days to crack down on spring breakers. The governor took no action to block 3,800 cruise ship passengers who were disembarking in Miami earlier this month after one of them had tested positive for COVID-19. He did absolutely nothing, just let them out into the population in Florida. And a lot of, probably the majority of people who take cruise ship trips out of Florida ports are Floridians, because it's cheap. They don't have to fly into town. The researchers theorized that the Republicans' delayed response to COVID-19 had been influenced by, quote, cues from President Donald Trump. Trump, quote, this is from the study, quote, strongly signaled that the coronavirus was an exaggerated threat or even a hoax, a position that was magnified and reinforced by Republican-leaning media outlets. Therefore, Republican voters were more concerned about Ebola during Obama's presidency than they are about COVID-19 under Trump.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The Boston Globe today saying Donald Trump has blood on his hands. 3,000 so far. And he's saying if it's 100,000 dead Americans, he did a great job.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, why did Trump delay? America deserves an answer. Professor Richard Wolff is here on his thoughts on the new coronavirus economy, the stimulus, and the 3.3 million people being laid off. Public Citizen's Peter Maybarduk has a warning to pandemic profiteers, and chief Washington analyst with the DC radio company, Victoria Jones, drops by to talk about COVID-19, UK, Boris v. Trump, and others. Stay tuned. Find The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from my sheltering at home, where Louise and I have been just kind of hanging out for the last few weeks. We did take one trip out. I think it was 2 days ago. One of our daughters needed her scrubs because she's going back into battle with this virus, and so we had to drive them over to our house, and we were able to see our grandchild. Although we stayed in the car and she stayed 6 feet away, and we threw the scrubs at her, and it's, oh man. But we're finding our way through this, and we're finding a lot of extraordinary grace in many of these moments. I realize there are so many people who are in so much suffering and pain right now, and that's with only 3,000 dead, and a couple 100,000 cases in the United States. It's going to get far worse, and I realize that too. But we still have to look for the moments of grace. We have to look for ways to adapt. We have to build our own resilience. Luigi in Pensacola, Florida. Hey, Luigi, what's on your mind today? What are you mourning?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener, first-time caller. My goodness, you've left me with a plethora of things to talk about. I don't know where to begin. It's just so much fun listening to you. Yes, I live here in Pensacola. I'm thinking about the truth. It's been 3 years. Not that other administrations haven't once in a while gone off the track, but to listen to this person and the people at Fox spout their nonsense, and you're dealing with people's lives. You're killing people. How do these people go home at night and talk to their families, or if they even bother with their families, and how do they look at themselves in the mirror? I cannot get that. My wife and I talked the other day how fortunate we are, because I'm a 55-year member of a union. I'm retired. I've been 12 years, but I still pay my dues. I get a good pension and my health care. I'm fortunate. And she cries all the time because her nieces and nephews don't have what we have, and we try to help them. But my goodness, I get so flustered at times at these Trumpettes, and I tell them, but go live there in your little, as you said one time, I think you call them a racist racist talk show host. Thank you. And I'm thinking, why are you coming out here in this universe here with your nonsense? Stay there and live with one another. I just don't get it. And I get so angry. Yeah. And I try to make people happy. That's my day. When I can make someone smile, no matter where it is, that's how I feel. I'm sorry, I'm going on blah, 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 as my wife accused.
No, that's great, Luigi. That's great. I'm assuming your question wasn't rhetorical, because I've asked that question before. I used to wonder it back in the 80s when we were struggling to raise teenagers and not have them get addicted to tobacco, and in Atlanta. Right. And I was asking out loud, in fact, one day I just, in a moment of absolute screaming frustration, when one of our kids, we caught her smoking, and Louise had just been to the supermarket earlier that day, and there was a giant Joe Camel display, with cartoon characters and stuff right by the checkout line in the supermarket. And I called the local RJR office. They're headquartered in Atlanta. We lived in Atlanta at the time. And I called their office, and this poor, woman who answered the phone, I just unloaded on her. I said, how can you even work for these criminals? You guys are selling death, and you killed my father, and now you're trying to kill my children. And she just said, I just need a paycheck, sir. And suddenly I felt like a complete ass. And so, I think in answer to your question, if it wasn't rhetorical, Luigi, Sean Hannity is a multi-millionaire as a result of the lies that he's been peddling for years and years. And that's true of probably the vast majority of the people. Pretty much anybody who's on Fox is worth multiple millions of dollars. And so, they go home to the same mansions and strut around thinking, in this Calvinistic worldview, that God has proven that they're good people because he blessed them with wealth. And it's the same way the tobacco executives think. And this is Betsy DeVos's religion. This is Calvinism. I mean, literally her religion. And I think it's essentially the psychology of the vast majority of these guys who feel that they need a rationalization. Then there's other ones who are just total sociopaths. They have completely bought into the libertarian worldview. To hell with everybody else. As Margaret Thatcher said, there's no such thing as society. It's only a collection of individuals. I have these people believe that they have no obligation to be their brother's keeper. And in fact, they take that question from the Bible and turn it into a rhetorical, no, I'm not my brother's keeper. I really think that what we're seeing now is a sorting, a very clear definition, and it's becoming more and more visible to everybody that there is a group of sociopaths who have enormous wealth and power and hold positions of influence. Obviously, one of them in the White House right now, the people around that guy in the White House, or at least many of the people around him, I think Anthony Fauci is probably trying to do the very best he can. I'm not sure about Deborah Birx. She keeps trying to kiss his butt. That's the price of the job. Yeah, I think probably in the case of those two, they're thinking that, well, at least I can do some good here. I may have to kiss his butt every day, but at least I can do some good. Luigi, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Nancy in Belmont, California. Hey, Nancy.
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. First time calling in, so I'm a little bit nervous. But the thing that I'm grieving the most is rational discourse with my two siblings. And you asked the question earlier about what is Trump's job and talking about the production quality from the Trump TV show that goes on every day. If I happen to call my brother, who is in a Chicago suburb, during that press conference, he will say to me, I have to call you back because I need to listen to the greatest president we've ever had. So totally drunk the Kool-Aid and more worried about his financial portfolio than anything else that's going on. My sister also has drunk the Trump Kool-Aid and lives in North Florida, and I'm so concerned. I'm so concerned about that they're just not paying attention. I can't really speak reasonably with them about it, and I just don't know how to deal with my own sense of just, are they going to do something crazy? And I don't know. That's the thing that I'm struggling with right now is personal family relationships.
Yeah, and grieving the fact that you can't talk to your brother and sister.
I can't talk to them about it. They repeat back the Fox News misinformation to me constantly. So, yeah, it's really both frustrating and terrifying.
Yeah. In my, when I go for a walk, particularly when I walk alone, that's my time to kind of talk to the sky. And one of the things that I'm constantly saying is, please awaken people. It's just, I think all we can do is pray for people like that and send them,
and
be there for them, be supportive of them. Yeah. And but I don't have a solution, but that's a solid one. Nancy, thank you for sharing that story with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good talking with you. Sam in Ouray, California. Am I saying that right, Sam? Or Colorado, excuse me.
Yeah, in Colorado, Tom. Appreciate you taking my call. Love your show as everybody else does. Uray's a little town. It's like we're at 8,000 feet, about 900 people, and I get to run and walk during the day. The way we meet is put our hands together, say namaste. We respect your spirit, your divinity, and just kind of.
Is your town populated with old hippies?
I'm one of them.
Me too.
Yeah,
I think namaste is great, except a lot of people won't know what you're saying. I mean, maybe in Ouray they would, but I'm not sure that the people walking along the Columbia River would.
Right, I did that to a guy in Pennsylvania, and he said, "What the hell is that?"
Right.
But I just had a few. I'm a first responder. I'm on the rescue team here and all, and what I'm hoping for more than anything is that the Dems can really use this opportunity to push the FDR agenda that the conservatives destroyed starting 40 years ago. To me, socialism just means come together, and socialist policies work during disasters and war. Capitalism does not. And, just a few things I've kind of noticed is Like I was watching the Minister of Health in Ireland. They nationalized their health care, and it's really showing the gap in our health care, obviously, and maybe that can be addressed. You know, like Pocan when he comes on, and Representative Moe and all. You know, we need to use this opportunity. The Republicans always use it against us. We need to use it for us. We could also show the gap in the wages with the people going back to work after they've, you know, made pretty good. The essentials aren't even making a living wage, and with the $600 boost, they get a little taste of it. Maybe when they go back to work, they go, hey, I'm not going to come back to work for $7.25 an hour. You know, you're freaking crazy.
Yeah. Well, that's happening right now. I mean, you've got Amazon workers and Instacart workers and people right across the spectrum who are saying, you know, we want hazardous duty pay, or just a decent wage. Sam, I got to run, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. I think that we are going to see a return to rational economics, that this is going to be the point at which America rejects Reaganomics.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It was rational Keynesian economics, FDR economics, that got us out of the Great Depression, and it was Reaganomics that threw us into this mess. And welcome back. MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ. Thanks for listening to KBCS. What's on your mind?
Good morning. I want to explain to you that there's a psychological property called highly sensitive person. And in a tragic time, it's like being on if you remember old party lines on the telephone in the country. It's like being on an emotional party line with everybody else. And so it's holding hands with humanity, even nature, you know. So you're really the best description I ever heard of it is, and a lot of jokes have been made about this, but the Force in Star Wars 1, there's a great shock to the Force when a planet dies. No, I'm going to cry. Anyway, my youngest child graduated last May in the performing arts, and there's a bigger difference than most parent-child relationships. And I got between us, and I got to know a lot of her friends, highly tuned artists, just ready to go out. They've spread out all over the world, from Vietnam to the Netherlands. They're just, and New York City, of course. If you're a performing artist, it's a place to go. And so I'm aware of these kids that I have. I don't mean that as any kind of pejorative to call them kids, but for me they are. And so I'm touching in with them. They're sometimes not even their own families are aware that they've received a shocking revelation, and I will see it online, and I can advise them and pass them something useful, and also I'm calling people that I know are alone at home, widows and widowers, and our church has a phone tree. Well, not being able to perform means that I don't get to do my music either. So one night my husband and I set up and played music out our front window into the street. And we have no idea if anybody even heard us. We sang our street Goodnight Irene, but,
Have you tried creating your own videos?
Well, we're still working a little bit. And my husband's writing wills. Imagine that. And
is he alive?
Yeah. So we are, but that would be a really fun thing to do. We have to kind of tap into some kids again to give us advice about how to get that accomplished. But yes,
there
we're
are
thinking
some
about that.
great
And
little tutorials over on YouTube that just tell you how to do all that stuff, and you can just watch. They'll walk you through it. You don't need to bring
That's
a
what we need to
15-year-old into your house and possibly expose yourself.
Yeah, no, we're not bringing anybody in. And I have one last thing to say, and that's that I think we can put some pressure on insurance companies to cover the uninsured at this time. And I'm so worried about the young people. You know, they just don't. Yeah. They have health care at about the same rate we did when we were 20. And
well, you live in Washington, I live in Oregon. In both our states, they've expanded Medicaid. So pretty much every young person in the state should have access to Medicaid. But MJ, thank you for the call. I'm very concerned about the young people in the red states that have not expanded Medicaid. That is a crisis right now, and not just the young people. I mean, right across the board, and low-income people, working people who've lost their jobs. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. So in our latest video for supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, you'll find a riff about a fellow named Errol Graham. He's a 57-year-old African English individual who starved to death recently in the United Kingdom. The neoliberal Thatcher policies are apparently echoing through the British system now in a rather substantial way, the same way that Reaganomics is echoing through the American system, and we've got tens of thousands of Americans who die every year because they lack health care or they can't afford copays and things. And we have literally millions of children in America who are malnourished or even go to bed hungry every night. It's pretty breathtaking stuff, and I think you'll find the rant particularly interesting or useful, and hope you can share it with your friends when you pick it up. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and boy, what a day, what a day. Eric in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Well, I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener. I just want to say thank you for what you do. I thought I would pass this along because it's the first time I've heard about this. My girlfriend has been sick for the last couple of weeks. She's doing okay, but she has an autoimmune disorder, so she was able to get a test from her doctor last week. So she got a test. Mm-hmm. She was waiting for a while to get the results. When she finally got the results, she wasn't positive, but they explained to her that the tests are only 30 to 35% accurate, which, needless to say, is quite
that doesn't comport with what I'm. Eric, I'm gonna drop you right here because that is absolutely inconsistent with what I'm reading on the science sites, and I want to be very careful about not spreading disinformation on this program. I'm very concerned about that. Eric in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Eric. Thanks for listening to 1510 AM. What's up?
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to make a quick distinction. I came across the Texas lieutenant governor the other day was calling for old folks to die for capitalism, not for democracy,
right,
if I recall correctly. And was intentionally vague about the distinction between the two. But on the other hand, we're now facing shortages at our polling locations for upcoming primaries, meaning our democracy is literally at risk, possibly. And I doubt a single Republican will renew the call for old folks to truly die for democracy. But
Donald Trump has come out and said that if everybody could vote by mail, there would never be another Republican elected. And he's right.
And he's very correct. I'd like to say real quickly, in saying hi to people. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Is I've actually taken to just waving at cars as they go by, assuming they're working, and kind of giving them a little sign of, friendliness as they drive by, as I take my sanity walk.
Right.
And my last thing would be this: is like to think that as I think about what I'm losing, I have a small business and income and all this stuff, and That's all kind of gone away as a small business operator. But really, what I've realized is it means nothing when comparing, to be able to hug my mom, my grandma, my sister, my friends. And that's kind of laid out priorities. But the last I'd like to say, I wonder if those of us in the dominant socioeconomic class here in America and around the world even are subconsciously possibly mourning the loss or pending loss of our collective privilege. Because the things you speak about, work,
that may well be a piece of it too, Eric.
Leisure, housing, faith in
Eric,
doctors,
forgive my interrupting you, but your phone is breaking up badly, and my concern is that it's making people crazy all across the country. But your points are very, very well made. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Robin in Kingston, Washington. Your thoughts, Robin? And by the way, let me just say in advance, there's no need to thank me or congratulate me or anything. I mean, sometimes people just want to say that because that's how they were raised, and you don't have to change, but it's not obligatory to say anything to me other than just start your point. To you, Robin.
Yeah, Tom, I'm calling up to just kind of slightly agree and disagree with you. You've I feel that part of your morning's message was that you're blaming Trump for the pandemic or our nation's inability to react properly. He clearly has mismanaged presidency from the get-go, so I don't disagree with that. But I'll tell you what I'm grieving about. I'm grieving about the loss of the peace movement. And I am coping by standing up more online and also, ironically, in the streets, for the peace movement. I really switched into high gear on 9/11, and now I'm redoubling my efforts in the pandemic. And this is why, because our country is over-prepared for war and way too willing to engage in it, and it's woefully underprepared for a national health care system and way too unwilling to do something about it. So that's what I'm grieving about, Tom. That's what I'm standing up for. And if I might, you've had several of the people who are in the existing anti-war movements on your show. David Swanson, World Beyond War, Medea Benjamin, Code Pink, then there's Beyond the Bomb, Answer, United for Peace and Justice, Win Without War, Books Not Bombs. And I just really think that as we are in a reflective mode now, that I can and do look at the demise of the peace movement as the portal into which grifting and greed and military industrialization and militarism has just kind of taken over our psyche. So the only thing
Robin,
that I would close with...
Forgive my interrupting, but I just have 10 seconds left here. My sense of it is that this movement has not gone away. It's just been buried by the coronavirus. It's so much the story of the day. And I think that, Iran is having a massive epidemic right now. They share a border with Iraq, and it's very porous. Iraq is going to soon have a massive epidemic. It's going to be a disaster. That, if anything, is going to push America out of there, I believe. I think we're going to see, as a consequence of this coronavirus, you're going to see America basically pull out of many of these areas. It's burning through American military naval ships right now. But yeah, we'll have time to get back to that, Robin. I don't think it's gone at all.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status, fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive-sum, but identity conflict is zero-sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. The Gift of an Existing Vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Amit Narang. He is an attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen, citizen.org. And his Twitter handle is TRYPTIQUE, Triptych. And Amit, welcome to the program.
Hey, nice to be back with you, Tom.
Thank you for joining us. Tell me about Donald Trump's, while he's doing his daily reality TV show in the afternoons on TV, and everybody seems to talk about that, his agencies, his regulatory agencies, the EPA, the Interior Department, et cetera, they are hard at work. What are they up to?
Well, that's right. Well, let me first say, hope you and all your listeners are safe and sane, or at least safe. That's the one thing that has not shut down under the pandemic has been the Trump administration's relentless quest to roll back all consumer, worker, environmental, and generally public health and safety regulations. And we're at a critical stage here with the Trump administration nearing the end of its first term. And so what the administration is trying to do is to not let the pandemic stop their finishing touches on their, anti-worker, anti-consumer, anti-environment deregulatory agenda. And I mean, it is pretty conspicuous to see the agencies moving full steam ahead, maybe even trying to go faster to rush these rollbacks out the door and finalize them, while they are, basically, otherwise directing all agencies to just focus on pandemic response and any regulatory issues related just to the pandemic. It seems to be. Can you
give me some specific examples of it?
Yeah, sure. So today we had one of the most consequential and damaging rollbacks that we've seen during the entire Trump administration. That's the rollback of the clean car standards. Those are the fuel efficiency standards that President Obama put in place that would not only save consumers an enormous amount at the pump, but obviously would reduce carbon emissions, clean up pollution, and slow down climate change. The Trump administration, despite the pandemic, decided today was a good day, probably because a lot of folks are distracted, of course, with the pandemic and not really paying attention to get out this rollback and finalize it. Because, these clean car standards, not only did it make 100% policy sense, good for the environment, good for consumers, frankly, good for the auto industry in terms of giving them certainty. The public...
the automakers supported these, didn't they?
Exactly. This is really going to be a problem. It's a lose for the automakers. It's really only a win for the oil and gas industry because consumers, of course, will be pumping a lot more gas at the pump and paying more money for it, of course. And that goes right in the pockets of the oil and gas industry. And that's why the public supports, higher fuel efficiency standards, cleaner cars, supported the Obama clean car standards. And so this is why the administration, would rather the public is not paying attention as they get this out. So I'm glad that you're shining a spotlight on it, Tom.
Charles Koch is probably the most conspicuous oil industry oligarch in America and has played a leading role, he and his late brother, David, in building the right-wing infrastructure that powers essentially the Republican Party and the right-wing media world. Are there other fossil fuel oligarchs that are funding the Republican Party so extensively that the party would basically put the health and lives of Americans at risk in exchange for their continued support?
I mean, the oil and gas industry just generally has an enormous amount of influence over the Trump administration, both the EPA, also the Department of Interior. Of course, the Department of Interior is run by a guy named David Bernhardt, who is a former oil and gas lobbyist. The current EPA head is, a former coal lobbyist, Andrew Wheeler. So it's not only some of these ideological warriors like the Kochs or just Charles Koch now, who certainly have a business interest, don't get me wrong, to try to gut any regulation that, hits into their profits. But it's the industry itself that has essentially made, the EPA and the Department of Interior subsidiaries of the industry. I don't really think there's any other way to describe it that's not overstating it. There's just so many conflicts of interest in this administration, folks that come straight from the industries that, these agencies are supposed to be regulating at arm's length. And instead, they're just turning these agencies around into factories to produce whatever the wish list of the oil and industry is demanding of the Trump administration. And this is the Koch brothers. They've been obviously very impactful when it comes to environmental regulation, but it goes broader than that. It is an ideological push to try to reduce, the ability of the government to protect the public. And honestly, we're seeing it in this pandemic. It's kind of crazy for me to be seeing the president and lots of conservatives on down argue that we should reopen businesses in the face of the pandemic because the cost to business outweigh the benefits of saving lives, by implementing social distancing. But that's just a feature of just how much these kinds of ideological warriors have pushed our government to look at policies that save lives, that protect the public's health and safety through an economic lens, first and foremost, and not through the lens of what do we value in our government? What should our government be doing? Which I think most people believe right now, is saving lives and not trying to avoid short-term costs that will cost lives and frankly will destroy our economy in the long run.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have about, by the way, a minute and a half to a hard break here. The EPA and this regulatory structure, by and large, was put into place back in the 70s. It got knocked back a little by Reagan and George W. Bush, but it has survived all this time. It's being gutted now by Trump. How long, assuming Trump loses and leaves office in November and January, how long will it take to rebuild the Interior Department?
I mean, it could take a better part of whatever the first term of the next president would be, and that's a long amount of time. And we do not have that time when it comes to climate change and pollution and pushing the auto industry to give consumers more fuel efficient cars. We've lost a lot of time under the Trump administration just on climate change. And frankly, that takes certain policy options that may have been on the table in the past. Taxing carbon is the one that comes to mind. It really takes it off the table because those are the types of measures that would have worked if we had more time, to fight climate change. But we have lost that time, and so we do have to look at more drastic, radical measures that are needed to save the climate on the much shortened timeline that we now have. This is a common again. We constantly are having our government wait too long to address crises, and then we have to take drastic action to fix it.
Yeah, so it seems. Amit Narang, he is with Public Citizen. He's an attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen. Citizen.org is the website, and Triptych is his Twitter handle. Amit, thanks for dropping by.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Sure. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. It is 15 minutes. Welcome back. Tim in Camano Island, Washington. Hey, Tim, thanks for listening to KSER. What's up?
Good morning, Tom. I wanted to mention that back when this virus first hit, there were a bunch of airport closures, Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, LA, a couple other places. But Seattle was not on that list. And of course, we're on the West Coast and a direct gateway to Asia. And there was about 2 weeks, I believe, where the Seattle airport remained open. And that's how we got patient zero out there in Everett. And now, last week, the Seattle...
I thought all the airports were still open to this moment, to this day. I didn't know that any airports had closed. What did I miss?
No, I'm sorry, not closed, but doing virus or heat testing for people that came and see if they had a fever. So they were testing.
I don't think we've been doing that anywhere in the country, have we?
Well, I don't think we're doing it anymore, but we were. And so there was an article in the Times last week where these people had flown in from Asia and directly from China to South Korea and then into Seattle. And they listed where they had been on a piece of paper, and they went through expecting to be tested for flu-like symptoms, and they were just shoved right through and told to keep going. So these airports are still wide open for this virus to come to us. And
I get it.
I wonder,
I get it, Tim.
why was there no testing done in Seattle of all the other airports being closed down and this being right on the West Coast directly across from Asia? You know?
That would be a question to ask the State Department that runs the Department of Immigration. I believe that's under state. Maybe it's under DHS. In fact, it's probably under DHS now, Department of Homeland Security, and of course the TSA, which is definitely under DHS. That would be a question for them, but they work for Donald Trump, and I think that probably tells you everything you need to know about it. You know exactly what's going on and why. Tim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Leslie in Portland. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hi. Nice to be on. I'm grieving the loss of critical thought and free speech kind of in this time of increased fear. And it's sort of fear that I wanted to talk about mostly because, you know, we're all in fear, or many of us are trying not to be in fear, but fear is prevalent. And, you know, we know that fear is a powerful tool that's been used, you know, in our history by the powers that be to, you know, manipulate us, to keep us feeling like powerless victims and so that we're looking for protection from our leaders. And the more we slip into fear and being victims, it is, the easier it is for us to be manipulated. And this is kind of pretty basic stuff. So in this time, it's just sort of this loop that I keep going in, which is, okay, I can't trust what my government tells me. This has been proven to me pretty solidly, over the past years. I don't trust what they tell me. I can't really trust corporate media because it's not really investigative journalism anymore, and Big Pharma pays their bills, and their stories are pretty limited to, whatever Trump says. I don't get a lot of the stories that are really help me, so I have to go outside of corporate media like yourself and to other channels for my information. I can't really trust. Am I there?
You got 15 seconds, Leslie, to finish your thought.
Okay, I can't also trust Google as a search engine, which is most people's only source because they are now Big Pharma. So when we have to circle all the way back for this public health emergency, but they say now you have to trust all those resources again when it comes to your health and what you're going to do for this cure and beyond. Like, where am I? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a conundrum, and it's a challenge.
Our 1 hour free podcast
Leslie,
recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just wanted to bring you up to date on some more of the news of the day, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls right over on the other side of the bottom of the hour. I mentioned in the first hour that the Trump administration has said no to a 4th stimulus. The 3rd stimulus, of course, was the $2 trillion one that was passed last week. Here are the details. Now they're coming out. Mitch McConnell, this was reported on Morning Joe this morning. Mitch McConnell said, quote, I'm not going to allow this to be this crisis, right, to be an opportunity for the Democrats to achieve unrelated policy items they wouldn't otherwise be able to pass. In other words, he's not going to go for another stimulus. He did say, however, that he is going to approve more right-wing judges. Meanwhile, the White House economic advisor told the Washington Post's Jeff Stein on yesterday, that the chances of congressional Republicans supporting a stimulus bill that includes progressive priorities such as more money for food assistance or an increase in Medicaid funding or even recurring direct cash payments to U.S. households like are being done by every other developed country in the world, the chance of any of those things happening, quote, are 0. The advisor said, no more spending. We did all the spending. And there's, with toothless oversight and a sneak attack on Social Security, this, so just, I guess we're going to have to just hunker down and take our $1,200 and say, oh, thank you, President Trump. That was so nice of you to give me $1,200. He wants his, remember, you see the news story? He wants his signature on those checks. He wants his name, Donald Trump, President of the United States, and his signature on every one of those $1,200 checks. Now, most of us are going to get it by direct deposit. But do you really think, Trump, that $1,200, a one-time $1,200 check, is going to save Americans? That it's even going to consequentially help Americans? I mean, I'm not opposed to it. It's a great start. but other countries are giving everybody $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month. I mean, typically $2,000 a month seems to be kind of the average of what's going on. Or they're guaranteeing, actually what's happening in most of the developed democracies is that the government is saying employers, even when you've laid your people off, pay them between 70 and 90% of their regular paycheck, depending on the country, right? 70% in Spain, 90% in Denmark, pick your country. Pay your employees and we will reimburse you. That's what the governments are saying in those countries. But not here. No, not here. We have Republicans in charge. Meanwhile, the captain of the nuclear, this is Sarah Burris writing over at Raw Story, the captain of the nuclear aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, is begging for help. The San Francisco Chronicle reported Tuesday that there's 4,000 people on this aircraft carrier. Between 150 and 200 of them have already tested positive. And the captain of the ship, Brett Crozier, wrote a 4-page letter begging the Navy for help. They're docked in Guam right now, and what he wants the Navy to do is rent, like hotels and things on Guam, so he can get the contaminated sailors off the ship. He wrote in his 4-page letter to the Department of the Navy, and this is almost, this is sad, right? He said, "We are not at war. Sailors do not need to die. If we do not act now, we are failing to properly take care of our most trusted asset, our sailors. The spread of this disease is ongoing and accelerating, and due to the warship's inherent limitation on space, we are not doing this," this being social distancing. He said the Navy, he asked the Navy for compliant quarantine rooms in Guam as soon as possible. And then he added, "Removing the majority of personnel from a deployed U.S. nuclear aircraft carrier and isolating them for 2 weeks may seem like an extraordinary measure, but this is a necessary risk. Keeping over 4,000 young men and women on board the TR is an unnecessary risk and breaks faith with those sailors entrusted to our care." Meanwhile, yesterday, Donald Trump had a meeting with a bunch of governors around the country. And Montana governor, it wasn't just Trump, it was, his science people. And so Steve Bullock, the Democratic governor of Montana, gets on the phone and says, "We don't have enough supplies to even do the testing. Literally, we are 1 day away. If we don't get test kits from the CDC, that we are 1 day away that we will not be able to do testing in Montana." And Trump jumps on, because Bullock had been talking to, I believe, the vice president. Trump jumps on and says, "Well, I haven't heard about testing in weeks. We've tested more now than any nation in the world. We got these great tests, and we come out with another one tomorrow that's, almost instantaneous testing. But I haven't heard about testing being a problem." This guy is so out of his league. He is so underwater. The governor of Montana begging for test kits, and Trump saying, "Hey, you got no problem." This is grim stuff. This is really grim stuff. So anyhow, we're hitting a break here at the bottom of the hour. Fascinating piece, by the way, over at Washington Post. Everything and everyone Donald Trump is blamed for his coronavirus response. It's amazing. And what Jerry Falwell is doing at Liberty University. We'll be back and pick up your phone
You're
calls
listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Falwell said that the virus was a liberal hoax, or words to that effect, and he invited the students back, and 6 students came back. The town is pissed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Anthony Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the high court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump, to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960, and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Vilma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant... In our latest video, for folks who support our show over at thomhartmann.com, it's pretty mind-boggling, actually. The candidate Trump back in 2016 said, I'm not going to cut Social Security like every other Republican, and I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid. Every other Republican is going to cut, but I won't. That's what he said. Well, what did his budget actually propose? His budget actually proposed, this is last year's budget. Congress didn't pass it, thank God, but this is what his budget proposed. $1.9 trillion in cuts to Medicare and Medicaid, and $26 billion in cuts to Social Security. And now he is block granting Medicaid to the states, which is already cutting back on Medicaid programs in the red states. You can check it all out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just to summarize a couple of the things that we've been talking. Oh, I mentioned the Jerry Falwell thing. There's a couple of stories here that I wanted to be sure to get in before the day is over, because sometimes I just move things over into the next day. But number one, Liberty University. This is an ongoing story. Jerry Falwell had said that the whole coronavirus thing is, he said the Times is false and misleading in their reporting on coronavirus. He accused the media of trying to fan it up, that's the coronavirus thing, to destroy the economy and thus injure Trump's presidency. And he told his students, come back to Liberty University, and about 2,000 students did. And the people in Lynchburg are very, very concerned. This is a very conservative town, but, they can watch the news just like anybody else. And, Falwell now has a bunch of sick students there. At least 12 of them are displaying the symptoms of the virus. And, he asked 4 of them who had been in New York City to isolate, along with 3 others he came in close contact with. 2 of the students said no, and they went back to their dorms. They said, we're asymptomatic. We don't have to worry. This is what happens when you listen to right-wing media, when you watch Fox News, and when you believe Donald Trump, or any Republican for that matter. And finally, I wanted to mention this story, the U.S. Interior Department. There's a tribe that's near Rhode Island. It's the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing. And according to Tribal Chairman Cedric Cromwell, the Interior Department has said no to them. They rescinded their reservation status. Why? This is from the Huffington Post story, quote, because the tribe, quote, would have competed for business. They wanted to put up a casino with nearby Rhode Island casinos with strong ties to Trump. These tribal members, the Mashpee Wampanoag, are believed to be descendants of the first Native Americans to encounter the Pilgrims nearly 4 centuries ago. They call themselves the people of the first light. And the president of the tribe says that this is cruel and unnecessary. Cromwell told the Cape Cod Times that he thought he was being contacted by the Trump administration to see if the tribe needed anything during the pandemic. Instead, he said it was like a punch in the nose from a bully.
No. Your reservation no longer exists. You can't build a casino on it to compete with my friends down the road. That is astonishing. I don't know the word beyond that. Mike in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Cheese greetings from the shores of Lake Michigan.
Okay.
I like to say cheese as a greeting because you can't help but smile.
Right.
And
well, in Wisconsin, people will get it, but here in Oregon, I don't think anybody's going to get it if I said cheese.
Yeah, but at least you're looking at somebody who's got a smile on their face when they say cheese back. You can't help but smile.
Yeah.
So
I think I'm going to just have to go back to saying hi or something like that, because somebody on Twitter pointed out that if you say happy pandemic and that person has had a person die in their family, I mean that's a greeting that isn't going to be useful very much longer.
Agreed. I'd like to invoke that, even in challenging times like we face today, it's really an opportunity. And I refuse to be feeling helpless or the feelings of fear or despair. It just seems to me now that we have so much more time on our hands, and right after we get our wife's honeydew list taken care of, cleaning out the garage and the basement, now we have time to delve into a lot of the things that we've longed to do, or certainly what I believe we need to do today, and that is increase our awareness, get involved in civic duty and responsibility. We have an opportunity now with, 70 million, 75 million people staying home to use our time in very, very wise, ways. And I think, just like, the tag, "You're it" mantra, this is it. This could be a very meaningful time and a godsend, if you will, of an opportunity for us to do what we need to do and learn about ourselves, what's important to ourselves, into our communities, and jump in and lend a hand. I think, the more that we do the right thing and we try our best to, create positive change, and we show people that you care, I think you're going to get it back to you many times over. So instead of being uncomfortably numb in this time, I think it's time for us to seize the moment, have a renaissance of awareness, and go out there and be useful and have a purpose. And if that doesn't, make you feel better, I don't know what will. I think we have a chance to do it, and right now is a great time to do it.
You're absolutely right, Mike. Thank you. That was inspiring. That was a great one. Michael in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good morning. How are you today?
I am great, but I'll get better. What's up?
Hey, I just wanted to let you know that Rick Wilson had tweeted earlier. Mitch McConnell was on with Hugh Hewitt this morning, and I guess the whole right-wing message machine is at it, and they're going to, again, go after Dems and blame impeachment for the lack of any action taken by Trump over this coronavirus, which I just find utterly amazing. I mean, the man managed to go, January 4th, January 5th, January 18th, 19th, February 1st, February 2nd, February 15th, again on March 7th and March 8th. And it wasn't until the 13th of this month that he even declared a national emergency.
Right.
And I think
do you recall the date, Michael? Because I'm seeing this all over Twitter and all over the right-wing websites, that the reason why the Trump administration was not prepared for this, they're starting to admit that they were not prepared for it. And the reason that they were not prepared for it was because Trump was preoccupied with impeachment. When did the impeachment vote happen? I don't recall, frankly. It was before Christmas, well before Christmas, wasn't it?
Well, the impeachment vote itself, was in the House, was in December. But are you talking about him being acquitted?
Yeah, in the Senate, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say he got acquitted around maybe February 5th.
Oh, really? Was that recently?
Yeah. So impeachment.
Well, this is going to be their. You know, I'm going to have to look it up, but this is going to be their narrative. You know, they've decided on a narrative, and they're going to, as the people in the red states start to die, they're going to say this is because the Democrats were impeaching Trump. And
I just got
get ready for it.
Wednesday, February 5th was the day he was acquitted, and he had all the time in the world to hate tweet everybody during impeachment. If we recall, he must have been sitting on his golden throne.
Well, it wasn't like he was busy. He was not complying with any of the congressional subpoenas. You know, Bill Clinton turned over like 10,000 pages of documents and things. Trump turned over not one single document, not one single witness. So, you know, the bottom line here, Michael, is there is no lie that is too big for these guys to tell. There literally is no lie that is too big for them to tell. Kimberly in Rochelle, Illinois. Hey, Kimberly, what's on your mind?
Hi. Well, one, my greeting hasn't changed much. I say hi. How are you?
Great. Hey, Kimberly, I just noticed that you only have 30 seconds to talk, so I'm going to put you back on hold, and I'm going to catch you. You're listening on Sirius XM, so they're going to hit a commercial break in about 20 seconds right now, and I'll pick you up in 4 minutes when Sirius XM comes back on. Because it's just not fair to you to give you 25 seconds to talk. My apologies, I missed that time cue. Donald Trump again saying that he's not going to allow any legislation to pass that is going to give money to the states to do vote by mail, because then, quote, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again, end quote. It's starting to get really, really ugly. And now you've got Mitch McConnell going on right-wing hate radio and saying people are dying because of the Democrats when he knows that's a lie.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your support group, media support group for We the People. And welcome back. Carol in Hemet, California. Hey, Carol. Thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for reporting on the Mashpee one panel lag. I wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Yes, I spoke to people that I know in the Pine Ridge Reservation, South Dakota. And I asked them, are they getting any of this stimulus money, the $1,200 check? I was told that no Native American, no reses are getting that check. They are not going to have any part of the stimulus because they are nations.
Oh, jeez. I'll have to fact check that, Carol. I certainly hope that's not the case. I mean, there's so many holes in this thing. Including regulatory holes that would prevent big corporations from robbing us blind. There's all kinds of loopholes that they're going to be using. I did not know about that. I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to share, here where I live, one of my dear, dear neighbors, his daughter is a home visiting nurse. This is what is happening. She had to have her own gear with the company that she worked for. She ran out of protective masks some time ago. She called her boss and said, I need protective gear. I can't find any. I need the mask. Because as a home nurse, visiting nurse, if one of her patients winds up in one of these rehab places for the seniors, they're still their patient and she has to visit. Now, those places are taking precautions and saying, you can't come in here, visiting nurse, without a mask, without gloves. Well, her boss told her, keep using the same mask, the same gloves. She's been
That's
doing that.
That's what Trump said on TV yesterday. Just wash them out.
Yeah.
It's like,
right.
Wash out a paper mask, really?
Mm-hmm. So for 2 weeks, she's been wearing the same mask. It's killing her knowing how wrong this is. But if he also told her, don't let them know you're wearing the same mask. So while these people are taking precautions, you've got bosses out there that, for the profit motive and to not lose a single patient as a customer, are forcing their workers to do this. It's just hell. And I am grieving
Carol,
the Native Americans
that.
and my neighbor.
Yeah, your daughter needs to document that to you in a way that is, that can't be disputed, in a specific email from her email address or something. I don't know what would hold up in a court of law, but you may, there's a basis for a lawsuit there, I think, once the dust settles here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Wow, what a day, huh? What a day. It is just extraordinary what's going on. And, let me just pick this up. Some of the people, this is from the Washington Post, some of the groups that Donald Trump has blamed for the coronavirus response. He's blamed China. He said it was their fault. He has blamed Obama, the Obama administration. He has blamed the media for the coronavirus. He has blamed the governors for ventilator shortages. Yes, it's the governor's fault. He has blamed General Motors for ventilator shortages. He has blamed hospitals for ventilator and mask shortages. And now Mitch McConnell is blaming Democrats. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, in 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Kimberly, you're back on the air. My apologies again for flubbing my break there. What's up?
Oh, no problem. No, I was saying, my greeting hasn't changed. I still say hi. How you doing? Just from far away.
I think I'm going to have to go back to that, yeah.
But my closing has changed a little bit. I say, stay safe, wash your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's great.
It usually gets a smile, and it's fine. I'm grieving. I work at a certain big box store, which has not closed. Mm-hmm. And every day I'm seeing the worst of it.
What do you mean?
Every day seems to be Black Friday over and over. People are not obeying any of the suggestions. We have masses of people, and mainly families with small children, coming in every day, shopping, visiting, wandering around. And it makes me very angry. I used to like my job. I get mad every day. But
where is Rochelle, Illinois? Are you in a rural area or in the middle of the city?
Northern Illinois. It's in between Chicago and Rockford. So
is it a small? Is it a relatively? I mean, I guess my question is, it seems like in the urban areas where you've got more Democrats, you have people who seem to be more well-informed about this and are behaving well. And in the rural areas, you've got people who just watch Fox News and they seem to be ignoring these rules.
And that's it. I seem to be a little red dot in a big blue state. And from what I've seen, people are treating it like a joke. I've had people laugh at me when I try to step back from them and distance. We've had angry people screaming and getting in our face. And it's just, please go home. Please stay home for the safety of your family, if not yourself. You know, I worry about what I bring home to my family. But on the flip side, you know, we're trying to make the best of it when I am home. We Zoom. I actually have set up this afternoon. I'm going to Zoom with my aunts and uncles and cousins, and we're going to have a family dinner through video.
That's great. That is great. We're going to be doing that
every
next
night
weekend with our kids.
Yeah. As like we've been watching. We actually have been going old school. We avoid the news. I frankly get my sanity from Progress and Free Speech TV and you and Stephanie Miller and but we've been watching Dick Van Dyke every night.
Oh, that's great. Isn't it ironic that that's in New Rochelle, which is where this New York explosion started?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
But we've been watching that. And then also the arts. I'm a theater person. You brought up theater earlier. And I am very involved with my community theater. And I was actually going to be in a couple of shows coming up and directing this summer. It's all canceled. It's all postponed. But we've looked at how many artists and the art that has become available online. So we found several links that are showing Broadway shows for free. And you can see the stage show and maybe shows you've never seen or would have had opportunity to go and see. And
these are performances that are being done without audiences, or these are just former performances?
They were former performances. It's like 2 nights ago we watched Mean Girls, the musical. And it was the Broadway show. It was in front of an audience, but they had recorded it. So you still see the show on stage as it was. And it's fantastic.
Was that Netflix or Hulu or what? How did you find it on YouTube?
That one was on YouTube. And it's like there are several on YouTube. There's also, if you go, I believe, On Stage, which is a theater blog, they had links to it, to all the different shows that are available.
Oh, really?
And so we've been doing that. And, you know, I myself am an artist, too. I usually host paint parties or craft parties. And now with Zoom, I'm actually putting together to do a paint party online. Still interactive.
Have you used Zoom before, or is this your first excursion?
We've used it a couple times. Actually, we had our theater board meeting using Zoom, and I had kind of heard of it. I hadn't really used it, and now it's just the greatest thing ever. And they must be getting such a boon from this because everyone's using it. It's a great way.
They are. Their stock price was up 150% this year.
Right.
Yeah,
but it's a great way. Luckily, our world has shrunk where we can still communicate. We can still see each other without being near each other.
I think a whole new world of stuff is opening up in some ways. As much as we're mourning the loss of some of the things that we had, our old normal, some new normals are coming along, and some of them are going to persist for quite a while. Kimberly, thank you for the call, and thanks for all your stories. They're marvelous. I really appreciate it. We'll be back. We'll be back tomorrow. It's the end of the show. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. There's a lot you can do just from home to help participate in our democracy and strengthen our democracy. So, electronically speaking, get out there, get active, tag, you're it. And, be nice to somebody, reach out to somebody, find ways to not just make the best of this, but improve on this. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be safe.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!